just going to record it now so that I don't forget. And then this will be going up on YouTube so I can share with other people, and I'm happy to share with you as well if you're interested. So thank you for joining what I'm very passionate about. This is called This Week in Jewish History, where I basically highlight 5 different events that happened this week throughout Jewish history. And I use both the Hebrew dates and the English dates, so we have different, last time I did this only for my Shlichim project called Life Online, I used also, so I explained how I used the Hebrew calendar and the English calendar, and how we had funny days from the 6-Day War that kind of came at the same week just because it's 2 different calendars. So here, one moment, and then also I want to share in the beginning as well to everyone the information about the different events that are happening. So the first link that I just shared is the B'nai Israel joined virtually with all the different events that are happening. And the second part is Life Online, which is a project I'm involved with the other shlichim from the DMV community and beyond. And we provide a lot of different variety of subjects. So if you can see, there's a weekly email that I'm in charge of. So I promise you it's very short, concise, and sweet. And the Facebook group as well, if you have Facebook and prefer to join through that. Okay, so now we will begin. I'm going to share this, so incorporates different clips. I'm leaving it like this because that allows me to still see the bar and still look at my notes as well. Great. So this week, I'll just mention the dates that we're talking about, and then I'll immediately go into the 5 highlights that I found for this week. And I purposely tried to find things that are from different subjects, so a little bit cultural as well as talking about a society. And yes, there's also wars that often come up as well, so it's trying to present heavy alongside interesting stuff as well. So the dates that I'm referring to now are the 31st of May until the 6th of June, so I go from Sunday to Saturday. I know that in the States it's often Monday to Sunday, but I'm going from Sunday to Saturday. So for example, 7th of June, which is next Sunday, is not in that. I didn't include that. And the Hebrew date, it's 8th of Sivan to the 14th of Sivan. So the 6th of Sivan is Shavuot. So we are right after that. So it starts from the 8th to the 14th of Sivan. And the different dates I'm referring to, most of them refer to the Gregorian calendar, but the first one refers to the Hebrew date. So I look at different sources to reference both of those calendars as well. Okay, so I will immediately just begin. And our first, I also want to note that I go not through the numbers of dates themselves. So it's not from 31st of May to 6th of June, but I go from the earliest year to the latest year. So it's chronologically year-wise rather than according to the days of the week. So the first event that I want to highlight is the foundation of Bnei Brak, which happened in 1924. And I also just want to, and this is the entrance of Bnei Brak. I also just want to note, sorry I didn't mention this beforehand, here if anybody has any questions throughout the conversation, feel free to use the chat that's at the bottom of the page. And please just don't, if you know the answer, that's wonderful, but please don't respond because then it confuses me when I want to answer it. I'll have time for questions at the end as well, because there's a lot of different subjects. I'm not going really in depth for all of them, but I am going a little bit in depth for each one. So feel free to ask questions and I will answer as best as I can. Okay. So 1924 was the foundation of Bnei Brak, which I don't know if you've heard of it before or not, but often it's known because of the fact that it is an ultra-Orthodox Haredi city. And I thought that it was really interesting to hear about the background of how Bnei Brak was founded, and also a little bit about its history up until today, because now we know that it's a place that, they're against the state and there might be extreme and they don't go into the army and etc. And I wanted to highlight that as well. I thought it was interesting. So 1924 was when Bnei Brak was founded. It was founded by people who were part of the fourth Aliyah. The fourth Aliyah comprised of people who were religious, specifically from Poland. And this specific group who founded Bnei Brak wanted to be farmers. And it was in a place, and the place was called a moshava. And it was a place where they were actually, they started agriculture in the beginning. So they grew citrus fruit. But at the same time, it's called a moshava, not a moshav, because it did have some aspects of being a city, as it was near Tel Aviv. It still is near Tel Aviv today, very, very near. And which was at the time as well, at the foundation of Bnei Brak, it was a city. So it did have an urban feel as well. And also, now, it was founded in 1924. They made citrus fruits, and it was religious. So it was founded as a religious moshava, but they were working agriculture, etc. So during the 1930s, various factories found their home in Bnei Brak, and also a known famous rabbi, the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Yishaya Kerlitz, found his home there as well. So it became a place that Orthodox Jews would go up to during Mandate Palestine. So by the 1940s, the Bnei Brak was expanding. There were 25 different factories in Bnei Brak. So we have agriculture, we have the factories, but at the same time, that very prominent component that there's Orthodox Jews who live there. And it was during the 1940s that the known yeshiva that's in Bnei Brak called, I'm gonna say the name really wrong, but Ponivet, the Ponivet Yeshiva, which is a Litvak yeshiva that was founded in Mandate Palestine 1919, was added to the jurisdiction of Bnei Brak. So all of a sudden, you had people in the city who were way more ultra-Orthodox. So even though the people who founded were Orthodox and they were, farmers and they were working in factories, etc., all of a sudden you had this yeshiva that was part of the city as well, or the moshava, and kind of defined it as ultra-Orthodox as well. So it was the yeshiva was founded in 1919, but it was added during the 1940s. In addition, I just also want to note that before the founding of the state, there were these various guerrilla groups. I'm sorry if I'm saying this incorrectly. The Haganah, the Etzel, the Lehi, and they had various different opinions about how to address the fact that the British were in Israel. And among the people in Bnei Brak, they were more involved with the Etzel and the Lehi, who believed that you had to take more action against the British. The Lehi were even a little bit more extreme. But both of them believed that action needed to be taken rather than the Haganah, who believed that it should be more defensive. So in 1948, prior to the founding of the State of Israel, there was tension between the groups in Bnei Brak when a Haganah member was murdered by people from the Etzel and Lehi. So I just think it's incredibly fascinating to think of the foundation of Bnei Brak. We were talking about up until the foundation of the state that they were religious and they were ultra-Orthodox at the same time. It had very much religious characteristics. But at the same time, they were farmers. They grew citrus fruit there. They, worked in factories. And at the same time, they were also involved in these guerrilla groups. So they were also actively fighting because they had to, as Bnei Brak also suffered from terror attacks before the foundation of the state. After the foundation of the state, and I'm going to briefly talk about that as well, because I think it's relevant, and I will also note also a video of what we see now regarding Bnei Brak. During the 1950s, if you divide the students in Bnei Brak, you had 38% of Haredi, people who were in Haredi schools or ultra-Orthodox schools, 34% of people who were in religious Zionist schools, and 28% of people who were in secular schools. So despite the fact that Bnei Brak was Orthodox completely, you had still 28%, almost 30% of people who were secular, who lived in the city at the same time. It was during also the 1950s as well that the Satmar, so the women here or people who know generally were in the Orthodox session, the Satmar Hasidic sect is very extreme in their views and their practices. They created a neighborhood in Bnei Brak. And basically in the 1950s was when the city had a turn and became really, really more ultra-Orthodox. And during the 60s, there was even a movement to try to bring more secular people into the city. And they were trying to sell houses to these people that were subsidized. But when that didn't work and they couldn't sell the apartments, they decided to sell it to the ultra-Orthodox community. And that official move created Bnei Brak to be an ultra-Orthodox city completely. And it remained the only ultra-Orthodox city until the 1980s, when more were founded and created. And what is also unique about Bnei Brak is that during Shabbat and holidays, the city is closed. You cannot leave the city. There's actually a blockade in the road, and you have to specially call an ambulance for it to come in and out. And there's been violence of people driving the street. So it's become a really enclosed place that is really purely for people who are observant and ultra-Orthodox, which you can have opinions from, if that's a good thing or bad thing, or what that means regarding a democratic society. That's a situation today. I had a video, but I'm not sure it's so relevant. I know that many people have been hearing recently about Bnei Brak and about the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel because of COVID and the fact that they didn't really keep or follow the rules of the police or the guidelines of the police saying that you should stay at home, and the idea of social distancing. But I do want to note that Bnei Brak is different than other places in the fact that you have a variety of people who are ultra-Orthodox in one specific city. That is compared to, for example, Mea Shearim, which is a neighborhood, in Jerusalem, that is right near Center City, that is right near other neighborhoods of people who are secular. And for that reason, they become more extreme. So in this video I saw, they were showing a clip of people who weren't observing the lockdown. And it was about Bnei Brak, but I noticed that the clip was from Jerusalem, actually, and it was from an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood that I was at recently because I was buying my candlesticks for my wedding there. So it's just important to be aware of that difference, that you have people who are enclosed in their own city, that they decide to be people who are like them. And in fact, that makes them more likely to, there was a bird flying right in front of our window. We have no idea why. Sorry. It makes them more likely to listen to the rules that the guidelines that the government is saying or the police are saying, compared to Mea Shearim, who are often more extreme in violence and riots, because they have people from other neighborhoods who are right there and they can't stop them. It's a neighborhood that has no boundaries or limits, and they often become more extreme. So that's Bnei Brak, and that's the development of this location. It's always been Orthodox, but from becoming a place that was known for being working and more active, it's become more ultra-Orthodox today, with yeshivot, with being completely closed, with being, officially an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Israel. So I saw that there were a few comments. I'll notice if, okay. I'm going to continue now, and now I will also share something else. So we're jumping to 1924, so before the foundation of Israel, all the way to 1958. And I thought this was fascinating. This is the first time I heard of this myself, and I thought it was super interesting. Maybe it's just me, it's okay. So 5th of June, 1958 was the opening of the Gallery of the Decade. So Israel was founded in 1948, and 1958 marks a decade for Israel's existence, basically. So they had this huge gallery opening up in Jerusalem in the convention center. And I just want to show first the symbol of the gallery before I go into more of how big it was, what was done. So I'll just note that in honor of Israel being around for a decade, there was a whole committee that was deciding what celebrations can be done in order to mark all of Israel's successes and accomplishments that have been achieved in this past decade. And doing this gallery in the Jerusalem Convention Center was one of those things. And they had pretty amazing things in there as well, which I will elaborate soon. But I first want to show this is the symbol, but there's another poster that has it, I think really expresses well the ideas of Israel at the time. I just don't want to forget the person who actually designed it. So it's somebody British. Somebody British, what's his name? It's a British designer, Abraham James, who designed actually quite a few symbols for Israel in its beginning stages. And he designed this one that we see on the left as well. Okay. So I will just share this. Now I think I realized that I didn't open it. Apologies. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Yofi. Okay. So this is the poster that came out in honor of the Gallery of the Decade. And this, the middle part, is what Abraham James designed. So what do we see here, basically? And this is from, as you can see, the National Library of Israel, where I took this from. So this is the actual poster that was shown. I wanted to use, a reliable source of what was shown, presented at the time of 1958 for this gallery. So what we see here, this is the menorah. Then that was defined as the symbol of Israel. And below here is a hand coming out of the menorah. So that goes to show the pioneer working of the land, the person who, strong, has his fist and his hand is coming out. So it's the symbol, it's the old along with the new. And another presentation of the new, along with this hand. What is the hand doing? You can see from the hand, this is a little plant. It's supposed to be a plant. So it goes to show that's what the hand has been doing. It's been growing in the places that have been completely desolate beforehand. There's a saying in Hebrew, "La'afrech et hashmama," so making, blooming the desolate, I guess is the translation. And in addition, we have this little thing as well, which is supposed to be a yud. A yud, so there's this whole, I don't know how even to explain it, gematria it's called, a whole system that basically translates the letters in Hebrew into numbers. So for example, when we have the 5th of Iyar Tashach, so Tashach stands for the 1948, because, and Tashach is Tafshin Chet. So because we have the fact that each letter is a number. So Yud is 10. It's the 10th letter of the alphabet, so that's pretty easy to define. But Kaf already is 20, so you just have to know the system, basically. But they put Yud as well to symbolize the fact that it's been 10 years. Now, in the background, we have, various people waving flags. That's supposed to be families waving the Israeli flag and being proud of being Israeli citizens. And we also can see that we have different types of family in the background. So this is somebody who's more religious. He has the payas on the sides of his head. Is there an English word for payas? Okay, side curls. Thank you, John. This was defined, I didn't say it, it was defined in the explanation. This is a Yemenite family that can be seen because of the basket that they're carrying and the load that they have over their head as well. So that was defined as a Yemenite family, together with somebody who is more bourgeoisie and middle class and maybe from Europe in that case. I don't know, whatever. With the suit and the stick that he's holding as well. But you can see he's more, proper in the way he stands. So we have different kinds of people and different kinds of family in all different ages as well, women, men, children who are boys and girls as well. And the two words we see on the bottom is shelanu hi. I mean, it is, and I can just translate and say, it is ours. So the whole idea is to basically say that all of us together comprise of what this decade has brought to Israel. And in addition, what's interesting is that we have here our exhibition, which we can see in English, but it appears in a lot of different languages. When the bottom is Yiddish, which I find extremely fascinating because you probably wouldn't find Yiddish on anything that would appear today. But it just goes to show you, on one hand, the recognition of all these different languages, that we all come from different places, and that Israel is basically the depiction of gathering of the exiles. But at the same time, what's big and prominent and our goal is the Hebrew, the melting pot, that we're all becoming Israelis together. Even if we might have different silhouettes, we all become one color, and it is ours as Israelis. So it is really interesting, just because it is really interesting because sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it really defines what Israel was thinking at the time. And the ideal is that, yes, we're all over the place, and we want to recognize that each person has different culture and is bringing different practices and beliefs. But at the same time, we're becoming a melting pot. We have an ideal that is an Israeli. It's the person who builds the land and carries the tradition. And that's what we're all going to become together. So that is the gallery of the decade. But I do want to note as well, what was at this gallery. Oh, okay. Okay, so first of all, there was somebody who was trying, the mayor of Tel Aviv wanted the gallery to happen in Tel Aviv, and as the preparations began 2 years beforehand, but the legendary mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, prevented that from happening, including the fact that Israel was the capital of Israel. So despite the fact that the announcement of the state of Israel happened in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem was defined as the capital, and as such, the gallery would take place there. And so this really was an extravagant gallery. And a funny little story that I found about the gallery was, at the opening ceremony, the president of Israel was supposed to press on a button, and all these amazing lights were supposed to turn on, and he would announce Vayehi Or, and let there be light. And unfortunately, it didn't happen because the electricity malfunctioned. So it's funny to think about that, because Israel does all these incredible things, but we have to remember that, yes, they were proud of the decade, but they still were around only for 10 years. So all these little malfunctions happened as well. So what kind of things appeared in the gallery? I just want to find that. So it was basically a fair that had different booths representing different bodies in the government. So alongside that, you had these booths of different ministries who were presenting what they did during the past decade. There was also Israeli artwork. There was a huge Ferris wheel. There was a robot that speaks Hebrew. The actual original scroll of independence appeared there. And there were also tributes to various new bodies that were in Israel. So, for example, Israel's social security body that's called Bituach Leumi had, an expose thing that they showed at the convention center. And one of the upcoming and growing building companies in Israel, which is still really known today, Soler Boneh, was also showing at the convention center as well. So it opened, as I said, on 5th of June. So it was a little bit after Israel's Independence Day, but it stayed open until the 22nd of August and had 600,000 visitors throughout the duration of the gallery. Another thing that I wanted to say was that a lot of things special happened during this committee actually thought of for celebrating the decade of Israel. So one of those things was, for example, an IDF march that they did, and this gallery as well. And in addition, the famous, for me at least, and for my family, the Bible quiz that it started national and ended up international, started and was thought of in 1958. So a lot of cultural things that have become, really known to Israel started out from this decade of this gallery of the decade, or a committee that thought of celebrations for Israel's first decade. I think I just want to show the pictures. So this is also a poster, but this on the picture on the right is basically one of the artworks that was shown as well. Great. So I want you to remember that the convention center in Jerusalem was used for the Gallery of a Decade because it also connects to our next highlight that is in 1960, I forget, 1962? Yeah, okay, I was right. So 31st of May, 1962, when Israel executed Adolf Eichmann. Now, the reason I mentioned, please remember the convention center, is because his case, which we see here in the middle, his court case, which we see in the middle photo over here, happened in the Jerusalem Convention Center, which goes to show that I won't go into the whole operation of how he was found. It's actually super incredible and interesting, and I really recommend looking for more information. And hopefully also next year I will be doing a session about special operations and then can relate to that specifically. But I will focus a little bit on what this trial was for people who are in Israel. So now we talking about the decade, we're only a few years later. Israel exists for now 14 years, a really young country, able to capture Adolf Eichmann and bring him to Israel willingly. And his trial happened in the Jerusalem Convention Center, not in a court case. So at the end of the day, his trial was a showcase. It was to show the Israeli society and internationally about the Holocaust. So I actually have a short video because other people can explain better than me, and one of those people are Deborah Lipstadt. And it's a really 2.5-minute video shortly talking about the Eichmann case and how meaningful and important it was in 1962. So if you've been to my Holocaust classes, I've also mentioned this as an important time or a really meaningful point when the Holocaust really changed the way that it was looked at. For Israelis, they didn't really focus on the testimonies. As I mentioned, you were supposed to become the strong, the pioneer Jew who built the land from nothing and everything. And the people who were just brought as, lamb to the grave, or the lamb were just burnt and died, wasn't looked at. They were looking at the stories of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And that was the ideal. Which is why the Israeli Holocaust Day is actually in memory of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So this really changed the thought of the Holocaust for people in Israel and internationally as well. So I will let Deborah Lipstadt begin talking first, and then I will share a few more points I have about this trial and how meaningful it was that it happened when it happened.
University.
There were a number of things that were significant about the trial. First of all, the fact how Eichmann came into the Israelis' hands. He was kidnapped in Argentina. They kidnapped him. They brought him to Israel, which caused a great ruckus in the international community. Many people felt it was okay to do it. Many people criticized Israel very severely. The trial really galvanized the attention of the world. There were, according to reporters who were there and reports there were more reporters gathered for the opening of the Eichmann trial than had been at the Nuremberg trials right after the war. This was the trial by the victims of one of the perpetrators. And that gave it a great deal of importance and gravitas in the eyes of the world. We knew about the nature of evil before the Eichmann trial, but the Eichmann trial also called it into the spotlight. Here was a man who didn't look very different from you or me. In fact, he looked sort of innocuous when they brought him into the glass booth. And it caused people to sit up and take notice and sort of see the perpetrator and understand that you can't say the perpetrator is other. The perpetrator could be us. And then you have to ask, what makes it possible for a seemingly normal person to become the doer of such evil? According to Israeli law, judges are not, if they find someone guilty, are not obligated to give the maximum sentence. They can give any sentence up to the maximum. So for a moment in the courtroom, people thought, well, maybe he had escaped the death penalty. And the judges then said, we therefore do not feel obligated to give you the death penalty. We choose to give you the death penalty. The enduring nature of anti-Semitism, it's an ancient hatred. And it led people in what was considered the most forward-thinking, the most accomplished, one of the most cultured countries in all of Europe, in the heart of Christian Europe, to do this kind of thing. If that's possible, anything is possible. This is the 50th anniversary of the trial, and I think it's important to remember what happened in the trial, even if it wasn't the 50th anniversary. But this trial put the human face on the nature of suffering. This trial reminded us, by virtue of Hausner's decision to put all those survivors on the stand, reminded us that the victim has a name and a face and a history, and this happened to people. It didn't happen to numbers. It didn't happen to just a large group, to large entities, but it happened to individuals.
The preceding program is copyrighted by
Okay. So a few things that I will also share from what Deborah Lipstadt said, so much better than me, is that this is the only time that Israel actually used the death penalty. It never happened in Israel before or after, so it really was a showcase and opportunity for the world and Israeli society as well to see the Holocaust in a different way. And she mentioned Hausner. Gideon Hausner now I can't think of the word in English, one moment, was the prosecutor of the trial. And I want to also read a quote that he said at the trial, which he also actually said had a decision to bring people who would share their testimony. So I also want to share his quote and then a specific example who, if you were at my Holocaust sessions, I apologize because it is a repeat of what I've said before, but we learn everything in different ways all the time. So Gideon Hausner said in the beginning of the trial, which is one of his famous sentences and a famous sentence about this trial generally. When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I am not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers, but they cannot rise to their feet and point an accusing finger towards him who sits in the dock and cry, I accuse. For their ashes are piled up on the hills of Auschwitz and the fields of Treblinka and are strewed in the forests of Poland. Their graves are scattered throughout the length and breadth of Europe. Their blood cries out, but their voice is not heard. Therefore, I will be their spokesman, and in their name, I will unfold the awesome indictment. Very powerful words. And just to give a specific example, one of the known people who were on this trial, his name is Yechiel Dino, and he would write poetry. His pen name is Ketsetnik, which means concentration camper. And when the judges asked, why do you go by this pseudonym Ketsetnik, he replied, it is not a pseudonym. I don't see myself as someone who writes literature. It is a chronicle from the planet Auschwitz. I was there for 2 years. The time there is not like it is here on Earth. Every single moment goes on a different time wheel. And the residents of this planet did not have names. They did not have parents or children. They did not dress like they dress here. They did not live according to the rules of Earth and did not die. Their name was the number concentration camper. So there was a lot of criticism towards him because he looked at Auschwitz as a planet that was separate from Earth, that it wasn't here, that it was something that was out of this world. But like Deborah Lipstadt shared, that it highlighted that it happens here and on the Earth. Yechiel Dino went through a psychological treatment afterwards, and a few decades later, he shared and kind of cleaned himself or changed his opinion about what that known quote he had said during the trial. He says, and then it was clear to me that it was not another planet as I had previously thought. Auschwitz was not created by the devil or by God. It was created by man. Hitler was not devil. He was a person. And really the fact that Adolf Eichmann was executed really puts on the forefront that thought once again. And the video was for 50 years, which was a while ago. So it's not 50 years this year, but just I thought that she shared very well, and I very much recommend to see the movie about her court case, Denial, that's on Hulu if you'd like to see it. I cannot share it because otherwise copyright and everything. Okay, so our next event in history. Oh, sorry. I have one more thing that I have to share because my husband is right here. So in the chat, he shared an article from Mosaic Magazine, his place of work. So I have to just be upfront about that. This month, the essays are about Adolf Eichmann and the trial. So he actually linked or put the link of an article that's by Deborah Lipstadt. Oh, it's not. Is she doing one? She's possibly doing one. In any case, throughout this month, there will be articles about Adolf Eichmann and the trial and a different way to look at it, because I asked him recently, why did he willingly go to be tried? Didn't he realize what was going to happen? There's a discussion about who Adolf Eichmann actually was and his character, his role in the Holocaust compared to who he became afterwards as well. And Jill's also noting that denial is in the B'nai Library as well, which is very important. So thank you. Now we will continue. Okay. Our next event is the 5th of June, 1967, when the Six-Day War broke out. So now I will also share that on the 9th of June at 7:30 p.m., I'm doing a special session being about 53 years after the Six-Day War, which mostly focuses on the results or things we're dealing with the Six-Day War today as a result from what happened in 1967 and the results of the war. So now I'm going to be more focusing on the things that led up to the war. And I'm briefly going to share another video which talks about 1948 briefly, if I open the right document to share that. One moment. Here we go. So it's shorter. It's because I'm starting it from 1 minute. So 1 moment. And we'll share in a second. Thank you for your patience. So I'll just know that I've been using this great series. It's called the Six-Day War Project that was from 2017 for various things. I'm not basing my knowledge on that. Don't worry, it's beyond that. But if you're interested in just seeing, short videos about the Six-Day War, it's a great project to do that. And so here I'm just sharing a little bit from this, and then I will just talk briefly about the Six-Day War and what led up to it.
1967, Israel stood in a precarious position. It was not the strong country that it is today. Only 19 years earlier, it had barely survived its war of independence. In that war, 5 Arab armies had simultaneously invaded in an effort to prevent the creation of a Jewish state. Yet the Israelis fought back and were able to reclaim sovereignty over their ancient homeland, establishing a nation-state for the Jewish people after 2,000 years of exile and periods of persecution. The War of Independence ended in 1949, but Arab rejection of Israel had produced continued terrorism from 3 borders. To Israel's north, from the Golan Heights, Syria shelled Jewish communities in the valley below on a regular basis. In the south and east, Arab terrorists from the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip and the Jordanian-controlled West Bank regularly infiltrated across the border, carrying out attacks against civilians and killing over 400 Israelis over the course of 19 years. At its narrowest point, Israel was only 9 miles wide and vulnerable to an attack from Jordan that could cut the country in half. Its supply of water was also under threat. Beginning in 1964, the Syrians had been trying to divert the flow of Israel's critical water source, the Jordan River. On May 11th, after a series of terrorist attacks, UN Secretary General U Thant stated that attacks on Israel were, quote, deplorable, insidious, contrary to the letter and spirit of the armistice agreements, and menaces to peace in the area. Israel had faced these threats since its birth. Long before the Six-Day War and before Israel had control of the West Bank, its Arab neighbors had rejected Israel's right to exist. To the Arab world, Israel's borders, the ceasefire lines of 1949, were simply the points where the war was paused to be resumed at any moment. That moment was approaching.
Okay, So here, I'll go back to sharing the screen. I also see that people joined us late, and I apologize if it's because the confusion of one compared to two. I'm purposely recording this, and I'm happy to send this. Just feel free to send me an email afterwards, and I can send you the recording so you can see whatever you missed beforehand. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this. Great. So the video really helped us to understand what was happening in 1940, 1949. And also, if we're referring to 1958 and the gallery of the decade, like I was saying beforehand, Israel's really young. 1967 is 19 years of a state's existence. And there's still a lot of things that are coming together and people getting used to. So it's important to be aware that yes, 1948 happened. There were threats on the different borders, but I will also note important things that led up specifically to the war. So first of all, 1956, there was the Sinai War. And basically up until that point, the Straits of Tiran, which you can see really in the map, it's here, the right side, the body of water we can see on the right side over here. So this bottom point is Eilat, and the Straits of Tiran were under international jurisdiction, and then Egypt made them national. And France and Britain didn't like that so much and asked cooperation for Israel to create a war. They did. They conquered the Sinai, and then it was given back. And after this all had happened, the situation between France and England and Israel kind of changed. But what is unique and important to know that after this war, UN forces were put on the Egyptian border between Israel and Egypt and was called UNEF. So you had UN forces that were between Israel and Egypt. At the same time, like the video said, Syria and Egypt basically both agreed that Israel was their enemy, and we have to find every way to continue fighting them to basically make sure that they are not here, and when that war will happen is unclear. So Egypt and Syria basically created an alliance, and they had, in 1964, they created this body called the United Arab Command in order to cooperate on this front. However, from the early 1960s, 1962, there was a civil war in Yemen, and Egyptians actually sent forces to help fight in Yemen, which created a situation in which, although they wanted to fight Israel, they really had to have that time in order to gain resources once again. So Syria and Egypt were talking about that fact that, yes, we want to fight Israel, we want to start the violence once again, but we need that time to get ourselves together and actually have resources to properly fight Israel. So what actually really caused the turn of events and built up the tension, specifically in 1967, if this has basically been building up, 1948, 1956, and throughout the 60s as well. So what happened is that the Soviets gave the Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat, so Nasser was the one who was in charge of Egypt, but he gave specifically to Sadat a warning that Israel would be invading Syria between May 16th to 22nd. It is unclear where this information came from or why they said what was the purpose, but they were also saying that there were concentrations of Israeli forces being moved to the northern border, which was not true. So Israel had to calm everybody down, but it gave an opportunity for the Egyptians to have a reason now to show aggression towards Israel. And this escalated, and on the 22nd of May, Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran. Okay, so closed that body of water so Israel could not go through, which is in fact, talking about the UN, is a use of force. It's against international law. And for Israel, this was their definition of, okay, Egypt has now shown that they're, using force, that they are being violent, and this is their aggression towards Israel, and therefore we must defend ourselves for that. However, at the same time, the US and the Soviet and the UN were talking to Israel in diplomatic terms and telling them, please don't be the first to shoot. Don't show aggression. We should find diplomatic efforts and ways in order to improve the situation. And their idea was to send a ship titled the Regatta into the Straits of Tiran and see if Egypt strikes first. If they do, then a war has begun and actual violence has happened. But Israel shouldn't be the one to shoot first. That was the clear message that the US and UN were telling Israel. And in the meantime, you had internal debate in Israel of Eshkol Levi, who was the prime minister, and the religious Zionists who wanted to take those diplomatic efforts, especially because Israel was so young and the US and UN and the Soviets were so important to be in touch with and have good relations with. On the other hand, you had Rabin and you had Moshe Dayan, who really just wanted to fight and show the strength of Israel, similar to the idea that Israel wanted to have in the beginning, that they're the fighter, they're the pioneer, they're the new Jew who's going to stand for themselves. I don't hear. Okay. So at the same time around. So also the end of May, Egypt also removed the UN forces from its border, and both the closing of the Straits of Tiran and also removing the UN forces were a sign to Israel that Egypt was preparing for war. They were actually moving forces towards the border. So all those things were showing that they were really preparing for war, and Israel should be on its guard. On May 27th, the US told the Soviets, who told the Egyptians, that they found out about Egypt's plan to attack Israel sometime soon. And when Nasser, the prime minister of Egypt, received the information, he actually was very shocked and alarmed, because it was true that Egypt actually planned attacking on May 27th, a few hours after he had received this information. And he was so alarmed that he was found out that he canceled the plan of attacking. So at the same time, so that really put a pause to Egyptians front regarding, this is May 27th. So what led up to the war starting on June 5th was that Israel continued a diplomatic route, but the US had stopped supporting the idea of regatta, of sending a ship into the Straits of Tiran. And they were basically saying, just wait for Egypt to strike first. Don't do anything, just wait for Egypt to strike. But Israel saw that there were, forces on the border, and knew that they couldn't just sit down quietly and wait for to be struck upon. So on 7:30 a.m. Israel time, which is 12:30 the day before U.S. time, it was decided that Israel was going to send the Israeli Air Force onto the Egyptian Air Force, and that was a major move that basically gave Israel the upper hand in the war. And I'll just read the quote that the IAF commander said to his pilots. Sorry, I closed it by mistake. Here we go. Oops, sorry. Says, the spirit of Israel's heroes accompany us to battle. From Joshua ben Nun, King David, the Maccabees, and the fighters of 1948 and 1956, we shall draw the strength and courage to strike the Egyptians who threaten our safety, our independence, and our future. Fly, soar at the enemy, destroy him, and scatter him throughout the desert, so that Israel may live secure in its land for generations. So Israel, in fact, basically targeted at least 50% of, if not more, I think it was 60 or 70% of Egypt's planes. While they were still on the tarmac, they did not lift it off. And they also ruined all of their, all the lift, how do you call it? The places the planes lift off? No, the runways. They ruined all the runways, so the airplanes actually couldn't take off. So that really gave Israel the upper hand of the war and caused the whole chaos that began the Six-Day War, especially with Egypt. And I'll also add that the fact that Israel actually attacked has become known as an exception of actually striking or use of force, and it's called a preemptive strike. Because they had all the proof that Egypt was showing aggression, the closing of the Straits of Tiran, the moving of forces towards the border, the removal of the UN forces, the UN actually accepted this, that was okay by international law that Israel did this, and it's one of the exceptions of use of force that is known by international law. Okay, I know that it's 1:50, I'm aware of the time, so I will quickly, the next one is really short. So the 6th of June, 1982 was the first Lebanon War breaks out. It's very, very short because I'm talking about how it broke out, basically, not the content of the war itself. So this war was against the Palestinians that were in southern Lebanon, compared to the second Lebanon war, which was against the terrorist group Hezbollah, which is still a threat today. So it's important to be aware of the difference of enemies in the first to second Lebanon war. And the terrorism that was happening by these Palestinians in southern Lebanon, they did a lot of terror at the time that was leading up until the second Lebanon war. So for example, and it started from 1968 during a 14-year period. So for example, the 1972 Minchen attack, when Israeli Olympic participants were murdered, was by that group that was affiliated with the southern Lebanon Palestinians. There's a lot of various different terror attacks that they did as well. So it actually began with the assassination of the ambassador of Israel to London, Shlomo Argov, by those Lebanese terrorists from that same group. So that's how it started, and they were connected with the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. After the assassination, the terrorists sent rockets towards Israel, and the Israeli Air Force attacked terrorist infrastructure as a result of that. So that's basically what started the war. And then once they had ground forces as well, both the IDF side and the Lebanon side, that's what basically started the war. I was going to show a short clip from ABC News, but I'm going to skip that because of the lack of time. It was from the first day that the war broke out. So if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share. So the war so we started in 1982, and it officially ended in 1985. However, terror attacks did continue on the border throughout the withdrawal process that happened in 1985. And although this marks the official end of the war, the terror attacks actually took place until about 2000, more or less, and we have another uprising again in 2006 because of the second Lebanon war. But there's a lot of criticism towards the fact that the first Lebanon war didn't really actually achieve its objectives. There were attacks there were rockets and there were terror attacks on these settlements that were in the northern border. And the war that happened for 3 years and had so many cost of lives didn't actually solve that, as when the war officially ended, terror attacks continued, and there was always more withdrawal that Israel was doing. So that's the first Lebanon war. And with that, that concludes our 5 events for this week. And I'll just review quickly about, and then I'll look at the questions as well. So just want to do a review of the 5 highlights that I shared. So first we have in 1924, the foundation of Bnei Brak. And I spoke about how it was founded and how it's seen today and that development that happened over the years. 1958, 5th of June, the opening of the Gallery of the Decade, and how we see Israel's ideal of itself and what they wanted to show during this gallery. The 1962, 31st of May, that Israel executes Adolf Eichmann, and how also this represented an important pivotal moment in Israel's history. The Six-Day War of 1967, which join me on 9th of June, I will elaborate more about its implications for today. And the 6th of June, 1982, which was the first Lebanon war breaking out, beginning the tension on the northern border, which unfortunately still exists today, although with a different group with Hezbollah. And Israel's biggest threat is with Lebanon, according to army officials. So I see there's a lot of questions, so I'll try to look at them right now. If there's anything particular, you can unmute yourself as well. We have 5 minutes for questions. Okay. So Jonathan asked, how did the Mossad create the plan to capture Adolf Eichmann? So there is a whole story behind it. I have this amazing book that I read recently called The Mossad. I don't want to go too much in depth, but it was having people in South America and trying to find where he could be, because they knew Nazis had moved out of Europe purposely, and they're moving to South America as certain countries were protecting their identity and they could create a new identity. thank you for asking also about Eli Cohen. So yes, Eli Cohen was, I think it was 1964 that he was executed, and he was hung by he was found out by the Syrians, and the information he provided definitely helped towards the 6-day war, and that's what I don't know actually specifically, but that's what Mossad officials say. His job was identifying the lead people and talking about what kind of resources and weapons the Syrians have. So being able to note that and even share that information was very valuable in order to actually know what Syria has in preparation of the war. Now, also, I didn't mention this, but the problem also leading up to the 6-day war, the Syrians were actually sending rockets towards the settlements on their border, and Egypt was furious because they were saying, we're not ready for the war. Why are you doing this? End of May 1967, we have these forces in Yemen, and we're trying to build up our resources. Why are you causing tension right now when we are not prepared yet? So that also was a problem with Egypt and Syria towards the 6-day war as well. Okay. So was Levi Eshkol on board in the planning of the preemptive attack on Egypt? So he was not on board of the attack first. Levi Eshkol had a lot of criticism towards him about being the person who was after Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was a very strong character who had clear objectives, and his voice he was very charismatic, and he was a character in Israeli society. So Levi Eshkol had criticism for the fact that he was flippity flop and not, this is my decision, I'm doing it, and that's it. Somebody join us right now. Okay. I see Karen is joining, so I'll make a note afterwards. So he wasn't because he was part of that being, flippity flop and unsure and not charismatic and decisive. He really wanted to have the approval of the U.S. He wanted to have the approval of the UN as well, and have support from these countries that were so large and important, in the world before doing what they didn't want to do. He wasn't as military as, for example, Moshe Dayan or Rabin presented themselves. He came on board afterwards, but he was really the voice that was against it and really wanted to try for diplomatic ways first. I don't know if Levi Eshkol's grandson is a famous poet today, and I can verify that. Okay, so there's another question, why did Nasser lie to the Jordan king to convince the Egyptians were winning the 6-day war that Jordan should join? Okay, so Jonathan's asking great questions. I'll just refer and then I'll end soon. So it is true that Nasser also, throughout the radio, when Israel was attacking towards the 6-day war, he basically said, how powerful we are, how ready we are to attack Israel. And that was including also lying to King Hussein of Jordan and asking him to join. The idea was that Egypt knew that it was not ready, that a lot of forces were being used in Yemen, and they wanted as much support as possible. Syria was clearly trying to start aggression with attacking the settlements on its northern border, and then the idea was to try to have that additional support and erase Israel if that was possible. And also, Israel was very careful. They knew that their enemy was Egypt, and they were fighting Sinai, but they were very careful in the beginning to not open, against Jordan and Syria. So it's important to be aware of that as well, is that it only happened later on in the war. Things moved very, very quickly because Egypt's air force was 70%, unfunctional in the first second of the war beginning. But these things opened up because of Egypt's lack of ability to fight the war. And also, even during the war itself, there were radio communications that we're here, we're going to win, everything's going to be fine. Okay, so I'm not a military expert, so I don't know how Israel defends against. So the question was, how does Israel best defend today against Hamas and Hezbollah? Maybe the idea of actually have to attack a nuclear reactor in Iran. I really don't feel comfortable answering those questions because I'm not a military expert and I don't know regarding the situation with Iran. Oh, okay. So there's a lot of different interpretations, a lot of different people who say, Israel's relations regarding Iran and Syria and Hamas and Hezbollah. I've been to briefings before, 2016 is the latest because that's when I was in the army. I do know that it's constantly a threat that Israel prepares for, but I don't know what are the defense things besides what's, obvious, like Iron Dome and having, reserve duty and whatnot. So somebody noted that Levi Eshkol's grandson is Eshkol Nevo, who I appreciate that because I do know he's a very known author. He's a really good author. So I'd recommend reading his books, which also brings me to promote Thursday's session, which is called People of the Book in honor of Israel's Book Month. So this week it is at 4 p.m. Please be aware, it's not like the email. It's at 4 p.m. If people want to join that. And there will be another email on Thursday which fixed that mistake. And I will make sure that on the virtually one, that information is there as well. With that concludes our session for today. And Karen, I know you joined late and I apologize. I know that one place it said 2, another place it said 1. So I will send you the recording. But thank you so much, everyone who joined on time. And next week it will be at 2 p.m. And then I hope that everything is clear with everyone on that, that it's 2 p.m. from now on. Thank you so much. And I will see you hopefully on Thursday or next week. And I wish you a great day and great week. And thank you for joining. Stay safe and healthy and maybe only hear good news.
Thank you.
Wait, I see there's, let's pause.